It's 10:04. Well, welcome to Releasing a Recipe on Drupal.org. By show of hands, how many of you have released a module, a recipe, or a theme on Drupal? Has anybody done that? Okay, cool. So some of it is going to be very familiar to you, but because this is a back to basics series, I'm trying to make sure everybody is on the same page. So I might give you a little bit of a rundown on like why that makes a difference and where that comes from. So Drupal recipes gets into core with Drupal 10.3, and that just happens last year that it gets released in the stable version. So before that, you could play with recipes, but you had to be on an experimental branch. So we're talking about something that's kind of cutting edge, and every time I tell people about SDC or recipes, a lot of developers haven't caught up yet. And understandably so, it's new, and a lot of projects haven't caught up yet because sometimes you think about the trade-offs, what are you going to gain from it, and hopefully this does some of that. Now, it was released on Drupal CMS as well, and that was nice. So now let's take a look at a quick recipe. I'm going to do a live demo as well, but I want to show you some of the folder structure. So if you are to set up a recipe, and right now I have it on the web recipes folder, but in Drupal 11, that's outside of the web folder and up directory. And I'll show you that in the code base. But if you had it there, let's take a look at that because that's a paragraph button. You could do it with anything. You could do it with paragraphs. Now, at the moment, there are not that many examples of paragraph recipes, and I feel like that's a little bit of a missed opportunity because paragraphs are all configuration. And if they gave you a card recipe that lets you have cards configured right away for you, why wouldn't you start with that? So our agency, actually, the agency I work for, we're trying to see if we can release some of those later this year. And then, have the public enjoy some of that. Now, there's a little bit of a disconnect between recipes and SDC for the end user. So just so you are aware, because that doesn't mean that because you apply a recipe, the item is styled. So sometimes they might be a little disappointed that you are going to have raw HTML or the raw output of that coming into the page, and you still have to map it. So hopefully that's an opportunity for the Drupal community to step up and find a way of bundling those together. So when you install a recipe, it looks nice out of the box, and it's not like, oh, let me map where that field is supposed to go to. So what's the basics for a recipe? You need a recipe.yaml file that has the name, and it says whether it's a recipe or any kind of type, and the configuration. Now you may notice this file at these fields right here, these three files. Those you can get them out of what you export from Drupal. So if you were building a site and you create a paragraph and a paragraph button within it, you do a drush CSD, and then you will look at what changed, and then you export that, right? But if you decided that that was something that you find useful for yourself or others, you could export that, grab those files, move them into a recipe inside of the config folder, and when you apply the recipe, it will be the same as if you manually clicked on the UI. And I will show you an example, but imagine how many times you create a complex configuration that took you a while that you could have reused for a different site, but you weren't sure how to re-import it. Or if you were doing re-importing that through a module, but then the module has a different set of concerns because now it's going to live there forever, and you may not want to have that. Something to keep in mind is that you do want to remove the UUIDs because usually these files have the UUIDs, and sometimes they have a core hash in there that's similar to a UUID, and that the core entity form display and the core entity view display, you could move those over if you want to have those same settings as what you configure them. But I usually like to go into the recipe.yaml and use config actions so I can make those dynamic and change them as needed. And I don't have to deal with any direct core files or directly reference core files. So this is what the recipe configuration, the recipe.yaml will look like if you are just trying to create an action. But you wouldn't have to do this. You could have just copied those files into this folder that Drupal exports, and then you'll be fine. But if you wanted to do that, then you just tell it to import, you tell it to use that action and some of the structure that the YAML structure to tell it that that's a paragraph button and what Boolean has to be checked, and move on from there. So let me give you a little story and a little demo on how this goes. So I tried a little while back to release a recipe on Drupal.org, and I thought, well, how complicated can that be, right? And then I went to how to create a new recipe, and then it kind of gives you a new project, and it kind of gives you a little breakdown on like the type of projects that you can create. And then at the moment, I thought, well, maybe I want to start it as a module because everybody kind of starts it as a module. And I thought, how hard can it be to change it later? Now, here's some food for thought for you because I didn't know that. Uh, the way that Drupal.org works is that you can set up a module or a theme project or a general project very similar to how you do something in GitHub. You put a machine name, you set up a repo, and it gives it to you. But once you have it, you cannot remove it without the Drupal association changing the type of thing that it lives on, and also you have to open a ticket with them. So it's not up to you once you create it to like change the project type or even change the name or do a couple of other things. So you might be stuck. So you have to be careful when you choose it. So if we go into like where'd I go? Okay, so if we go to the create general project, these are your options. And I'm gonna create a default one, and I'm probably just gonna ask the association later to delete it. But you have the name, you have the short name, which is the machine name, and then you can select the status, and there's a couple of other fields in there. And then you go towards the bottom, and hopefully the internet holds up. Let me click save. Oh yeah. So this is a general project that I just created, and it's just called Demo Drupal Camp Colorado. And what this gives me is a Git repo and all the basics of what you will need to publish a recipe, a module, a theme, or anything else. If you're doing a recipe, make sure it's a general project. If you didn't make it as a general project and you want to keep the same namespace, then you have to contact the DA. And unfortunately, there's no delete button. So if you messed up while you type in the name or something like that, well, you have to contact them too, because they don't let you delete it, because once you create it, there's a concern that somebody might be using it, and they don't want to break that pipeline. So that's something to keep in mind. So if you go into the repo itself, you can take a look at where did that button go? Yeah, that's weird. Usually you have something here that says going to GitLab. Well, let me go to for plan B. So usually will look like here, like this, and it says development, and it says source code, or it says something else, and then you. I am. I thought I am. Let me double check. Let's refresh the page. Oh, there we go. I guess maybe it doesn't load the first time around. Oh, okay, cool. Huh. So here's your repo. This is what you will be Git cloning to actually put your recipe on and then push it upstream. By default, it will create a main branch. That's something you want to be aware of if you haven't ever published a recipe, a module, or a theme, that you could change it here before you push to use semantic versioning, and that's what most everybody uses, but I don't know that I've seen that in the docs in a lot of places. So some projects out there just use the main branch. And I guess if you're just getting started and trying to have something upstream, it wouldn't matter as much. But as soon as it starts picking up and as soon as you start getting people to contribute to it, you probably want to have a version number. So if you change that, people are aware of that and they can address it as needed. So this all was created by me dynamically on the fly, and that's what I did for this one. Well, no, actually, this one was Martin, but where did that other one go? For this one. So this is one that I'm gonna demo called the Event Platform People. Where did this one come from? So I don't know if you guys are aware of the event platform. That's a project that Martin has. That's basically a way for you to set up a Drupal camp or anything like a Drupal camp that's pre-baked and pre-configured with a lot of different features inside it. Now that I kind of spin up out of like Florida Drupal camp, and the schema for some of the information, the way that Florida does it is slightly different because Martin has been trying to accommodate for more generic use cases. And one of the things that was different that I noticed the other day was the accounts. So if you went into the accounts for different users, the one that you get with Drupal.org the one that you get with Drupal 11 by default only has a picture. And you can add more fields if you needed to have them on the user account. But that is what you get out of the box. But sometimes you want to have more information. And and this is what it will look like if you are a user. You have like the current password, the email, and this is where you have the picture. But in Florida, Mike was using that to also populate where people worked at and a little bit about where you live, because sometimes you want to have that link to the user account. So when people log in, they can update that themselves. So something I worked on that we are trying to bring back into the event platform is having that as a recipe. So let me apply that recipe. Let me see here. And right now I have a DDEP local environment. That's ready to go and that I spin up just for that purpose. So I'm gonna run the recipe command, which with Drupal 11 is just DDEP brush recipes and the recipes folder. If you might notice, I have to do ... And that's because in Drupal 11, they decided to switch up where recipes live. I used to put recipes inside of the web folder because then it will make it easy because everything in Drush uses web as a relative path. But the Drupal community decided to put it outside because recipes is not something you have to share with people and it's supposed to be a use one type thing. So, but the only challenge with that is if you're using the Drush command, you have to go up a folder. Otherwise, it fails catastrophically and you're like, oh, what happened here? And if you're using 10.3, you couldn't even use the Drush command because it's only available on 11. If you're using 10.3, you have to DDEP SSH and do the PHP version of that, which I have posted in other sessions, which is just like DDEP PHP. But if you're using 10.3, just keep that in mind. That's something to look into. So let me apply that command. So I'm applying that recipe, and that recipe I actually brought them down from Drupal.org this morning, and that applied the platform people. So now what happened here? Remember I showed you that you have like the managed fields and you only have the user picture. So now on this side, this is the same environment, and let me refresh the page so you can see the changes. And boom, now, if I had to do this manually every time for every new site, that'd be a pain in the ass, right? Because like you having to go in there and remember the machine name, and then you mess that up, and then you're like, it's really hard to remove it later. So imagine having the power to do this from within Project Browser and other things to just be like, I just wonder what Florida is using for their people user accounts for that specific purpose. Bring it down, pull it in, and then just map it to whatever you want. That's fantastic. So now what that did is if we go into this page and I refresh the page, now you have hometown, title, organization, and then you also have the social media links, because social media links, and this is actually pulling in a module that does like different ones that you can configure to have just Mastodon, Drupal, or whatever else. Everybody needs to have a social media or, how you want to reach out to them on their page. And Drupal doesn't really provide that out of the box on core, and I don't think it has to, but it'd be fantastic if there was an easy way for you to have that added through a recipe. Now, something else I did on this instance is that I also installed Project Browser. because project browser is still a contributor module. And at some point, it's probably gonna get, did I do it in, let me see, I think I have it on this one. So if you install project browser, or maybe I haven't done it on this one yet. If you install project browser on Drupal 11, outside of Drupal CMS, you can browse some of the default recipes that are in core. I'm assuming those are the ones that are in core, because right now we have Drupal CMS and then we have Drupal core, Drupal 11. Drupal CMS lets you install recipes from within the UI. And I imagine at some point, once they connect back to Drupal.org and it's not the pre-baked recipes for Drupal CMS, it will be any recipe. But at the moment, if you're using Drupal CMS, what you get is a subset of recipes that they kind of hard coded in there and adding into that bundle. So it's not like every recipe that's on Drupal.org. But right now I just install Project Browser. And if you see, we have multiple tabs on top. I know somebody asked me the other day, like, how do you get to the recipes inside of Drupal or outside of Drupal? There's two ways. One way is this one, although I don't think this one is still loading everything from Drupal.org that's labeled as a recipe. It's just bringing in some of the ones that are included in core, which is reason because I don't remember seeing this before. So if you have you seen this page before on Drupal 11? Have you installed Project? Okay, so it must be a fairly new release because I remember Project Browser's recipe tab only being on Drupal CMS for a while, and I guess now they're trying to bring it back in and then connect it back to Drupal.org. So now you have the different recipes, and you have the command to apply it, and this kind of shows you the command if you are using the ddev SSH thing and going into the thing and into the container. But remember, you don't have to do this because Drush has a utility, and if you're using Drupal 11, you can just use that. Um, but yeah, so then you have different recipes in here that you can apply and use. Uh, there's also, if we go back to this page, not that one. Let me just Google it. Project recipes. There is also this page that the Drupal Association seemed to have released recently that I hadn't seen. So you could go to the same page where you looked at modules and themes to look for recipes, but now they have an extra dedicated page just for recipes for you to look at different ones that's sorted by recipes. I don't necessarily know yet how they are sorting this by recipes, maybe because people declare them as recipes in the general content type. But now you can have like different examples in here, stuff to look at and something to play with. So if you hadn't seen this page, something to be aware of. So with that, let me get back to the slides. So the first time I did this, I made the mistake that I took a namespace that was already used for something else, not necessarily for that module, but it was already used for something else. And when I published it, it never went to packages. Oh, I guess that's something else I should point out, and I have it on the slides, but might as well show you here on the page. When you publish a recipe, there is no, if you do a module, you might notice sometimes there's a little thing down here that tells you what the composer command is, and that's really quick. And I don't know for if you all use it, but for me, it was very quick to just click on that link, paste it over there. If I don't have that, I'm like, ooh, what is the name of the module? And do I have to do Drupal / name of the module? And what about the versioning? You can still get that for recipes, but you have to go to packages because here's that. That's what I actually expected to see over there under the section. So recipes doesn't do that at the moment. I created an issue with them because they told me that that's something that they have in the roadmap, but they hadn't really explored. So at some point, they might also include this in there for you to just copy the composer command. But not at the moment. So if you have to do it, you can go into packages and you can search for that package and it will tell you all the information about it. And if you want to have a different release or you get about a loading that specific one. So let's talk about Oh yeah, what I was telling you about the issue I had. So the issue I had is I was using a common name that was already taken. Because if you know, when you create a project on Drupal, Drupal will prevent you from using something, a machine name that is already taken. Like nobody else could have this one because it's already used by this project, the event platform starter. So I was using a namespace that was used before, but it was somehow deleted from Drupal.org. So I reached out to them because I was wondering why it wouldn't appear on packages. Because once you publish this and once you add code into it, you have to create a release. And once you have a release, they have like a cron daemon that goes in there and picks it up and sends it over to packages. And that's when you can do a Drupal composer your recipe. If you don't have that happen, then it won't find your recipe. So an easy way to tell if your recipe is ready for you to use it with Composer is you go to packages and you type the name of your recipe, and if it shows up, it means that it has been indexed already. And if it's not indexed, then you might have to wait a little bit. But if you wait more than a day, more likely than not, maybe you ran into some issue. So you should probably post it on the Drupal infrastructures channel, because that's what I had. I just had a conflicting namespace, and that's why I wasn't publishing. And I thought it was something else because I thought maybe I messed up my recipe composer.yaml file, but no, it was just a name collision with something that existed at one point in time, and they kind of half deleted or maybe half migrated, and they had to remove the old one. So let's get back to the slides. So as I was showing you earlier, recipes are a general project. So don't forget that. Choose a general project to start on. At some point, they might have another category for recipes, maybe, but at the moment, that's where you want to put them. It requires a ticket to change the name, the machine name, and a couple of other things in there. So be careful when you are setting it up the first time, or otherwise, you're going to have a placeholder. Um, yeah. Remember that the composer command, you can get it from packages, but you wouldn't find this line down here as you will do with modules. With modules, it's just easy to see down here in this section what the composer command is, but for recipes, you're gonna have to either know it or just go to packages. And make sure to use semantic versioning because it will make your life easier. And I did a little research on like what people that had multiple modules, Martin and a bunch of others are using, and that's the most sustainable way for you to have a recipe that or module or theme that's upgrading from one version to another. And then you can let people know that if you have some major non-backwards compatible stuff, or if you toss in extra configuration or improve your recipe significantly, they can have an upgrade pad or choose to like do something about that and address it timely. So the workflow for a recipe is very similar to a module and a theme. So if you publish those, then this might be very well known and you kind of be familiar with some of that. Um, but releasing a recipe is significantly easier because you're using a lot of the stuff from core already. You're just telling Drupal, give me the configuration changes, export the configuration changes, and you say, oh, these configuration changes, I feel like it'd be useful. Let me toss it into a recipe and I might use it back at some point. Maybe release it, maybe keep it for your own. Um, but the learning curve, I feel, for recipes is significantly shorter because with a module, you have to know a lot about PHP, you have to know a lot about how the Drupal system works with Symfony and a couple of other concerns, and whether you want to do routing. With a recipe, it's just Drupal core. It's just you taking a snapshot of that configuration, grabbing it, putting it in a bucket, and telling somebody else, grab this because it's cool, I made it, and it serves your purposes and it served mine. So this kind of brings us to like a better experience out of the box. And I know there's been a little talk about that because I feel like there's going to be soon enough, there's going to be an implosion or explosion of site templates and platform starters. So I was talking to Martin about that because there's an event platform starter that we started recently, and that's basically to bundle a bunch of recipes that will make your site go from 0 to 100. So you can have content if you need it, but if not, at least you can have a bunch of recipes playing together and bring all the modules. Now, the meta thing about recipes is that a recipe can include many recipes inside of it. So you could have a recipe that loads like 10 different recipes. You could probably stand up a whole site if you needed to. Or just use it as a subset of that. And Commerce has one of those. Like if you look at their Commerce Kickstart demo, you can take a look at how they actually are wrapping all of the configuration to try to make it a little easier to spin up and play with. So Drupal recipes and project browser, I added a little bit of information because all of this stuff was added. I mean, COVID had a lot of bad things, but I feel like everybody being remote and being at home kind of like moved the Drupal project faster, at least at the beginning. And maybe I still feel like, I mean, if we go back to 2019, there were so many things we didn't have. And during the last 5 years, it has been significantly improved and significantly enhanced to make a new user's life easier. And you have things like SDC as well, which are fairly recent. I mean, SDCs has only been released for about a year too. So recipes and SDCs are out in the wild for only about a year, a little more maybe, but not that much. And then you have things like default content. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with Drupal Forge. And I know Salim is here, so he's probably going to enjoy that. But some of the things that I did this year was like, I wanted to make sites that look nice and have some default information available for people to play and poke at. And if you go to Drupal Force, there's a couple of templates that I added in there that make it easy for you to like understand how the other sites are set up. So for example, this one is one based out of Florida, because I every now and then I contribute back to Florida, DrupalCamp, and a couple of other ones. And so I asked Mike if he was okay with me publishing some of the data and using a database dump of his and creating a recipe out of a database dump, so we could have a lot of the information, and then other camps and other people who might be interested in setting up a Drupal site could have all of this out of the box. So this here, I think it's a database snapshot, so it comes up really quickly. But if you look at the code, and if you were to open up the Cloud Dev environment, you can look at the recipe that is added in there, and that is a content recipe. And if you apply that content recipe, you will have all their sessions and all their users, even though the password has been changed, of course, because recipes doesn't really include, whatever the user set as the password, but it will include the stuff. So Mike Herschel and everybody who spoke at Florida DrupalCamp on the past year. So you can have what Florida DrupalCamp looked like right after it happened. Because, our camp is mostly useful if you can look at the scheduled sessions and everybody and like who's there, and you can reverse engineer a lot of that stuff. Because learning Drupal has been hard for many reasons, I feel, but one of them, because there's not that many examples out there that are complete. Sometimes you have to put stuff together on your own and hope for the best. And sometimes you were able to find some projects out there that were published, but they didn't have default content. If they give you the configuration for a project without default content, you are in for a treat or a mess, right? Because like it's gonna take you forever to figure out how they set up their cards and how their theme talks to the other stuff. But if you have default content, then you can just look at what actually works and not worry about their skeletons in their closet. And if they have some features they don't use, you can start removing them and see if they break something, instead of you trying to put it together and stumbling upon those and be like, this button doesn't do anything. They just left it in there as a blank. So yeah, so that's something to keep in mind. So check out Drupal Forge, check out the recipes that are published, because they should make it significantly easier for anybody to get a site up and running. And then a modern theme, like these are all the things that site templates and the Drupal community are trying to promote with the marketplace, which is supposed to be incoming at later this year. And I'm excited about the marketplace, because right now, at least at my agency, there's a lot of conflict between the agency stakeholders and moving back to WordPress and a couple of other systems because of the marketplace. Because people can get flashy sites really up, campaign sites quickly up and running with WordPress. And it doesn't mean WordPress is bad, and it doesn't mean that there are certain things, but the fact that we don't have a marketplace is a significant cripple to Drupal, and I feel we need to have that ASAP so we can compete for some sites that people need, that they need by tomorrow or in a week, and then you can tweak them and grow them over time, and then you showcase the value proposition that Drupal has and how it can significantly improve their their outcomes and what they're trying to achieve. But that said, there are templates already out there. I mean, there might not be what Drupal considers a site template, because if you saw, Drupal said recently, or well, I don't know if it's Acquia or the Drupal Association, that site templates are going to come directly for Drupal CMS, because they're trying to base it on Drupal CMS, which is fine. But Drupal CMS has a lot of modules included, so that created a little bit of a conflict for developers who are just using Drupal 11, because you will hope that you could also just pick the site template and use it in whatever you have without maybe some of the bloat that Drupal CMS adds. Um, I mean, Drupal CMS is great, but if they are only going to target the marketplace and the site templates for that, I feel like that's a little bit of a missed opportunity. You should be able to pick up a site template without having to use Drupal CMS, or with Drupal CMS if you want to. But that's just kind of like my thoughts on that. But there are some site templates out there, or at least I consider them to be site templates. Like on Drupal Forge, I tossed in a couple of one for Drupal for Gov. There's the Florida Drupal Camp. There's Olivero, Drupal GovCon. All of these are open source GitHub repos for the most part. And some of them, I added a PR to add a content recipe, which is what I'm calling the recipe that just adds content, so you can actually look at it and play with it as if it was a full complete site, and not just like, let me install it and have a blank page that has like a footer and a header, because how fun is that? So yeah. And then automatic updates. Has anybody used automatic updates here? Is anybody using it? Oh, that's cool. Because I feel like that is something else that's going to become super relevant. And I wish that went in there a little earlier. Um, but the fact that it's in there now is fantastic, because I mean, I've been guilty of forgetting about updating a site in Joomla or WordPress for a while, and then you get back to it and you're like, oh no, is this thing gonna even work? And then you upgrade it and it dies, and then you're like, okay, well, we're gonna put it in the corner and try to maybe migrate that thing at some point. But this is something that is fantastic, and I know that it's going to help a lot of new users. And recently, our Drupal users group is trying to go out to all things open and reach out to different communities. And we need to sell them automatic updates, the marketplace, and some other things that Linux admin users and a couple of other people who are geeks and hobbies can take, spin up, and wow people. Because, like, I mean, the Florida Drupal Camp, we have a competing conference in Chattanooga called Scenic City Summit, and I actually presented there earlier this year. But look at this side. It's just simple. Like, I feel like the Florida side could be reskinned to serve the purposes of this website. And this has a Blue Cross Blue Shield and a bunch of other big brand names that could probably be interested in seeing how what is actually running behind the scenes for a site. And this is actually WordPress, but they haven't touched it in ages, I don't think. So yeah, so that is a missed opportunity, that sites like this couldn't be in Drupal, and that we couldn't have a marketplace that will allow somebody to spin up something like that and get it up and running, and have some of these sponsors just recognize the power that Drupal has and how it can make a difference for them. Now, recipes is a little bit of an army knife, right? Because if you bundle too many of them, you might end up with a little bit of a bloated configuration. So you may want to look at what you're adding. And if you're adding a platform starter, or if you're adding a site template, you may want to explore what is actually importing into your site, because now you're going to have a lot of foreign configuration added in very quickly, and you could end up with like a super thick army knife. And who wants to carry that, right? Like, I mean, you want sometimes something slim, sometimes you want something like that if it's an enterprise site and it has that many requirements. But you don't travel with the thing, that's the thing that you keep at home and you only use it when you need it and for a specific purpose. And I mean, it could be a Swiss Army knife, or it could be a Leatherman, depending on what you choose. And then that the other tools are also going for the recipes concept. So I feel like it's fantastic that we're trying to get ahead and get it close to the marketplace, because Laravel is following what WordPress called recipes, which is blueprints, and they have somebody working on that as well. So as we get closer to releasing the marketplace, probably people from the Laravel community are going to compare it and be like, well, how far can a recipe get me? Can a recipe get my site up and running and add some content to that? And if we can do that, we are potentially setting ourselves for success and for somebody to be able to get a prototype up and running quickly. And I feel like that's kind of like what is in our best interest at this point in time, for people to explore it, play with it. And if they only need like Laravel's or WordPress functionality, that's fine. But they didn't have to complicate their lives getting one Drupal, getting it set up uh, from the get-go. Um, I was talking a little bit about this earlier about Florida Drupal Camp. This is the original repo that Herschel has, and that has the theme and it has some of the configuration. And these are some of the commands you would run if you're just using Drush, because you probably know that what I did with the content recipe is what you could do a little bit if you did a Drush SI flag existing config, because that is a command that exists in Drush to actually load the configuration you exported. So it doesn't do a sign install from scratch. It just loads whatever you put in the config folder, which is great. But it also requires you to have the minimal profile last time I checked. And a lot of Drupal sites were set up with the core standard profile. And if you have core standard, then it's bad luck for you, because this command fails. And it tells you that it couldn't do it because it has to initialize certain modules and do it in a procedural way. So hopefully that's something that gets fixed soon. This is not as relevant to recipes, but that's something that you should know if you're trying to play with a site that is on GitHub and why not, and then just spin it up and have it running like they have it. So, go ahead. No, go ahead. You can ask me questions anytime.
So the content recipe,
right?
Built. What's that? Like, because you can use that recipe with any type.
No, it's tailored to the configuration of an already existing site, because it exports as YAML files, and it knows that it's linking back to a paragraph type that exists on a certain node. So default content is the name of the module that you want to use for that. And I know there is a Drupal initiative to actually add this to Drush and have some way of doing it from within Drush itself. But if you install this module, you can tell it export the taxonomies, export the nodes, which are the pages. And
so is it kind of like, what is that, the Drupal module that would like develop generate content?
Yes, except for
creating like lorem of something. Like if you have a topics vocabulary, it'd be like, I don't know, alpha, beta, gamma, class, like the names, something like that.
Yes, therefore you can get the data that you actually, real information, because the Vel module could populate it, but it would just use lorem ipsum and why not, and that's okay. But sometimes people want to see something that they can relate a little more, and if you already have the database dump, why wouldn't you reuse some of the content and tailor it to that specific user's need? And same with the images, because this will download, if you download a node and then you export a node, it will download the node, all the images associated with the node, and some of the taxonomies and users that are associated with that. But it's based on the configuration of the site, so you cannot really move a content recipe around from one site to another if they have a different architecture. It relies on the fact that it's this site that had some information entered to it.
Okay.
Now, if you had recipes that made the configuration match, then you could apply. You could have enough recipes and apply them to a vanilla Drupal site, and then have the content come in, because it will find all the machine names and all the things that it will be expecting to inject the information. And honestly, I found this module to be easy for like smaller migrations, because if you have a site that has like 50 pages and you just need to migrate the 50 pages, you export that as YAML files, and then you suck it back into another site that you upgraded, and then you're good to go. Because this doesn't really care about what version you're running, if it's Drupal 10 or Drupal 11. It's just about like bringing the information back in. It will tell you if there is some schema things that change, and you might have to tweak the YAML file to match, but it could be significantly faster than learning the Migrate API and trying to map all the stuff. Because if you use the Migrate API, it's powerful, but it takes a little while to know what to call, when to call it, and to learn how it connects and how it does the ESL mapping.
Yeah, cool.
You're welcome.
So to add on to that, though,
Yeah.
to be clear, recipes function pretty much exactly like the old install profiles. They're just more modular, right?
I guess so, to an extent. I know the install profiles, the problem is they were hard to remove, and recipes are only applied. They are not really installed themselves, because distributions and profiles had the issue that once you added it, you kind of had to do a little bit of a hack. Because we had a Lightning, which was the Acura one for a little while, and then Acura released a way of uninstalling that thing, but it was a little tricky because you had to do that in production. And the way you deploy a recipe is you download the recipe, and I was thinking about that the other day with Composer. Then you apply the recipe to your dev environment, and then once you apply it, you re-export that as configuration, and then you just move it upstream. You don't keep the recipe on your Composer YAML file, ideally, or move the recipe all the way to production, because it doesn't have any purpose in production unless it's like a default content recipe. If it's a configuration recipe, you should never make it upstream. It's just the configuration itself. And you guys may have or may not have seen that recently they also added unpacking, which is an interesting feature, because an issue you used to have with recipes is if they depend on other modules, like this one here. If a recipe included, like this one is including the social media links and Pod Auto and some other stuff, before 11.3, I think, or 2, whichever one we're on right now, the issue that you had is that you couldn't remove the recipe because it was relying on its composer.json file. It was relying on this one to actually load those dependencies. So if you remove the recipe and the configuration got to production, it will break because there was not, those modules weren't found, and it will give you some issues. But now it does some unpacking. So when you do a composer require of any recipe, it will go over here and add this. I didn't add this to my main composer.json thing. It just automatically brought them out of the recipe and added it into the main composer file. So that means that if I remove the recipe after I apply it, I don't have to worry about my Drupal site missing a module and failing to install, because now it's part of the main composer. And that was a missing piece, because I was like, oh, how the heck do I remove the recipe if it's still calling the other little composer file inside of it?
Still a bit confused. You said you wouldn't use recipes in production?
That's yes, unless they are default content, because the recipe is just a tiny bit of configuration that you're going to move around. So I wouldn't use them in production, because you could have it on your local, export the configuration as if you were to type it into the UI, and then move it upstream. I mean, it's not any different from what you do already with a Rush CEX and then export config and then push it up the stream. It's just, yeah. The only reason why you have it in production is if you wanted to have default content, but then you have to be careful, because if you apply that, you could override something or you could create some issues in your production environment.
I need to clarify one quick recipe. You want to apply the recipe directly. You can apply the recipe in dev environment and then promote the stuff to production.
Right.
Am I right there?
Yeah. Unless it's a production environment that you never used before and it's a clean database. In that case, it wouldn't matter if you just apply it there. But if it's a database that already has information, there wouldn't be any reason for you to have the recipe in production, unless you're trying to use it to like migrate some stuff for configuration or something like that. But for that, you might be confusing what a recipe and a module is. A module, you could just move configuration and update it later at some point if you needed to, or if something changes. A recipe is just a snapshot in time of a feature that you wanted that somebody else had, or that you had on your own that you just want to have on a different site. It's just you moving a content type from one site to another easily, and then after you move it, then you either leave on with the new one or just create a new recipe and then delete the old one and go on as if you had just clicked it on the UI.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying about existing sites exporting the configuration.
Right.
I was thinking about new sites that you're just spinning up, though.
Yeah, for a new site, you could do that, I guess. But then, I mean, you tend to do that for a new site anyway, right? Because if you're going to input information, if you spin up a site on Pantheon and you are doing it manually, sometimes you move the database because you had it in dev on upstream to production, but you only do that once. And once editors start adding information, you don't want to do that unless you want to lose data. So yes, you cool, but you just have to be careful on how you do that. And ideally, only at the beginning, not later down the road. Any other questions?
And it doesn't support default content within the recipe, right? You still have to have a separate default.
No, it supports importing the default content. It doesn't support exporting it. So default content to have the drush command that exports the configuration requires that module at the moment. I think they're working to bring it into drush, but I don't think it's in there yet. But that's only to export the default content. To import the default content, you can just tell it to import that information, and you don't really need any third party or the default content module. So it's a one-way street. Go ahead.
The thing you were showing that you work with Martin with the event platform,
Mm-hmm.
is that already on Drupal Forge? I know you guys.
I haven't asked him if that is the version that he added to Drupal Force, but it might be. I know he was working on that last week.
Yeah,
Um,
I know he's working there and all that.
I don't know if he's. Oh, okay.
Scroll down. Yeah.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, I don't know if that's the latest one, but I think he.
Yeah, it might be. So if you want to take a look at some of the stuff that Martin has added to the event platform, this will be a good demo for that. Because this is, I don't know if for Drupal Forge actually grabs the recipe, but the recipes are included because we usually work with recipes at the beginning and then it adds a database snapshot just to spin it up really quickly. But this is kind of like what we're working on the event platform. And what makes this different from the Florida one is that Martin added a ton of improvements if you're the content editor. You might not see a big difference if you are the developer, but if you are the person entering content, it's way easier to, uh, if you go into the scheduling side of things and you have to like put people into different rooms and whatnot, it's way easier to use this system because Martin made it so it's using like a UI drag and drop, so you can just move people into different rooms. Whereas in the Florida one, you're using taxonomies. And let me tell you, I did that last year for Drupal Camp Chattanooga. It took forever. I'm trying to see if somebody else does that or if we move to the event platform before that time comes, because I was like, oh no, spending 2 hours moving down taxonomies and figuring out if I put people in the same room because it's hard to see on the UI.
We should use that.
Yeah.
How's Mike gonna feel about all of the Drupal camps looking like Florida?
I feel like Mike be excited about it, being that he's the Olivero. He just like to see his code places. He'd be like, yes. I mean, he would like, I'm sure, that people skin it a little bit. Because if you guys seen, that's hilarious.
The palm trees and pine trees.
So Twin Cities did a really good job of skinning theirs and having a different color palette. This is based out in Florida as well. So that I think has been fantastic. And this is not the latest version, like the event platform switch up to the one that Mike released last year, which is, a little bit of a color contrasting, high contrast. But yeah, so there's a bunch of different ways you could set this up. And if I don't know if you're involved with the Colorado community, but I'm sure they will appreciate you helping them with that if you are. Hey, it happens. It happens. So all of this leads to happy end users, happy hobbyists. Let's try to make it. If you make some configuration, or if you have any configuration on any of your sites that you feel like other people could benefit on, make sure to publish them on, as a recipe on Drupal.org, because it's gonna be hard eventually because there's gonna be so many recipes that might conflict with one another. Because I might do a button paragraph recipe and he might have one and you might have one, and so now we don't know which ones. But that doesn't matter to the end user. The end user just wants to grab a bunch of recipes and get a site up and running and have something like what I was showing you earlier with the platform started or Florida or something like that. To them, this is what matters. And what we want to make sure is that we have enough a building block so we can spin that up really quickly and make it accessible for them. And also so we can have examples, because there's no paragraph examples right now on how to do a recipe with paragraphs on Drupal.org or how to do a views recipe. But they are simple, and I've done a couple, so I'm going to try to push them up there so other developers can look at that, take them as inspiration, and move on from there. And with that, I think that's pretty much it for me. If you have any questions, I could take those now, and if not, thanks for coming.